Chapter 12. No Apology. The word sorry appears 3 times in the Oprah interview. The first time, it is Oprah who says it. Near the end of the interview, after Cabot has described the death threats and the paparazzi and the children who were afraid she was going to die, Oprah pauses and says, "I am really sorry that you had to go through that." Cabot receives it. She says thank you. It is a moment of genuine warmth between 2 women, one of whom has been given a platform and one of whom provided it. The second time, it is Cabot who says it, as a reflex, almost parenthetically, in the middle of a story about taking her daughter to the local pool in late August. A woman began photographing them. Her daughter just lost it and said they needed to leave. And I was like, "I'm so sorry," Cabot says. The apology is to her daughter, for the inconvenience of being photographed, for a situation Cabot could not control. The third time, it is Cabot again, interrupting herself mid-sentence to use the word as a courtesy. "I do have to say, if I can interrupt, and I'm sorry." And then she finishes the sentence, and it becomes clear the sorry was not for anything that happened at Gillette Stadium. It was a conversational apology for redirecting the discussion. 3 instances of the word sorry in an interview that ran for over an hour, not one of them directed at Megan Kerrigan Byron, not one of them naming the woman whose husband was in that VIP section, not one of them acknowledging, directly and without qualification, that something was done that affected someone who had no say in it and who deserved to be seen in the accounting. This is the absence this chapter examines, not the absence of a confession or an admission or a legal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Those are not the standard being applied here. The absence of a single, clear, unprotected expression of remorse directed at the person most directly harmed by the choices that preceded the concert. The absence of the word sorry said in the right direction. The record of what was said. To examine what was not said, it is necessary to be precise about what was, because fairness requires the full record, and the full record is more complicated than either Cabot's defenders or her critics have tended to acknowledge. In the New York Times interview in December 2025, Cabot said, "I made a bad decision and had a couple of high noons and danced and acted inappropriately with my boss, and it's not nothing. And I took accountability, and I gave up my career for that. That's the price I chose to pay." In the Oprah interview in March 2026, she said, "I own the poor decision that I made in that moment, and I've paid an unimaginable price for that." She also said to Oprah that she felt tremendous guilt for the effect it was having on her family, and that she felt responsible for that. She said she was embarrassed and horrified. She said it was not nothing. She said she owned it. These statements are real. They are not nothing, to use her own phrase. They represent a degree of public acknowledgement that many people in equivalent situations never offer. They should be recognized as such. And they are also examined carefully, consistently oriented in one direction, toward Cabot's own experience of the consequences. The accountability is framed through the lens of what it cost her. "I took accountability and I gave up my career. I've paid an unimaginable price. I felt tremendous guilt for the effect it was having on my family." The guilt is for the effect on her family. The accountability is demonstrated by the price she paid. The ownership is of the poor decision, not of its impact on the people outside her household who were also living in the aftermath of that decision. The word sorry, when it appears, is directed at herself, at her daughter at the pool, at her own disrupted life. The acknowledgement of harm, when it appears, is the harm done to her. The accountability that is claimed is demonstrated by the suffering she has endured, not by the suffering she has caused to be endured. This is the specific shape of the missing apology, not a gap where nothing exists, a gap where something exists, something that sounds like accountability from the right distance, and that, on close examination, has its face turned the wrong way. Regret is not remorse. The distinction between regret and remorse is not merely semantic. It is structural. It describes a fundamental difference in moral orientation, in where the moral attention is pointed, whose experience is centered, whose suffering is given weight. Regret is self-referential. It is the feeling that arises when we survey the consequences of our choices and find them worse than we wished. It is a response to what happened to us, to the loss, the exposure, the altered trajectory of a life that was moving in one direction and was redirected against our preference into another. Regret can be genuine. It can be deep. It can be expressed with apparent sincerity and received by an audience as evidence of a person who has genuinely reckoned with their situation. But its orientation is inward. It surveys the landscape of what we have suffered and finds it unacceptable. Remorse is different in kind. It is other-referential. It is not primarily a response to what happened to us, to our losses, our consequences, our altered lives. It is a response to what happened through us, to what our choices produced in the lives of people who did not make those choices. Remorse does not first ask, "What has this cost me?" It asks, "What have I cost someone else?" And it does not move past that question until it has given the answer its full weight. Clinical psychology has documented this distinction with care because it matters therapeutically as well as morally. Research on genuine versus performative accountability, in therapeutic contexts examining infidelity recovery, in organizational contexts examining leadership failure, consistently finds that the people most likely to produce lasting change in their behavior are the people who can make the shift from regret to remorse, from the self-referential accounting of their own losses to the other-referential accounting of what they caused. This shift is harder than it sounds. It requires a level of self-extension, a willingness to inhabit, imaginatively and seriously, the experience of the person you have harmed, that the self-protective instincts of a person in crisis tend to resist. In the Cabot interviews, regret was present throughout. Regret for the exposure, regret for the consequences, regret for the impact on her children, her career, her sense of self, her daily life. All of that regret was real, and much of it was communicated with genuine feeling. Remorse, in the specific other-referential form that remorse takes, was not consistently present. It was not directed at Megan Kerrigan Byron. It was not directed at Byron's two sons. It was not directed at the employees at Astronomer whose working environment had been shaped by a dynamic that the company's most senior people had allowed to develop. The feeling that would have required expanding the frame beyond the self, beyond the immediate household, beyond the personal consequences. That feeling, if it was present, was not given a voice in either interview. The architecture of managed accountability. It would be too simple, and not quite accurate, to say that Cabot offered no accountability. The more precise observation is that she offered accountability that had been architecturally managed, shaped to acknowledge enough to satisfy a particular threshold, while avoiding the specific acknowledgement that would have disrupted the narrative she was building. Managed accountability has a recognizable structure. It begins with acknowledgement of the action. Yes, this happened. Yes, I was involved. Yes, it was a mistake. It proceeds to contextualization. Here is what was happening in my life. Here is what I believe to be true. Here is what the situation looked like from where I was standing. It moves to the enumeration of personal consequences. This is what it has cost me. This is what I have lost. This is the price that has been paid. And it concludes with a statement about moving forward. I have learned from this. I am a different person. I am working on rebuilding. This structure is coherent. It sounds like accountability. It contains the word accountability. It uses the language of ownership and responsibility and recognition of error. And it never, at any point in its arc, requires the speaker to expand the frame beyond themselves. The managed accountability structure does not have a step that reads, "Here is what this cost the people who were not in the VIP section, who did not make the decisions, who woke up one morning to find their private life on a jumbotron." Cabot's interviews followed this structure with considerable fidelity. The acknowledgement was present. It's not nothing. The contextualization was extensive. The separation, the development of feelings, the plan for disclosure, the alleged deception by Byron. The personal consequences were enumerated at length. The career, the threats, the unemployability, the asymmetry with Byron's recovery. The forward motion was present. The speaking circuit, the work on changing narratives, the message to her children about mistakes not carrying life sentences. And throughout all of it, the step that was missing, the step toward the people who most needed to be acknowledged, was not taken, not once, not in the Times, not on Oprah, not in any public context that has been made available to this book. What remorse actually sounds like. This is the section the introduction to this book was pointing toward when it said, "I know remorse." Remorse has a look to it, a smell to it. It does not arrive composed and careful. It does not center itself. It does not explain first. It bends, it strips itself down. And somewhere, unmistakable and unhidden, at the very front of it, is the word sorry. What does that actually look like in the specific context of this specific situation? Not in the abstract, not as a general moral principle, but in the concrete, specific terms of what Cabot could have said on Oprah in front of the world with all the platform she had been given. That would have constituted genuine remorse rather than managed accountability. It would have sounded something like this. I want to say something directly to Megan Byron. I don't know the full picture of what you have been through. I don't know what you knew or when you knew it, or what the last 8 months have been like inside your household, or what you have had to explain to your sons. But I know that my choices, and the choices of someone I trusted, put you in a position you did not choose and could not control. You found out the way no one should ever find out, and whatever Andy told me about your marriage, whatever was true and whatever wasn't, you were the person who was not given any of that information. I am sorry for the part I played in that, not sorry for being caught, sorry for what it cost you. That speech does not exist in the public record. Something like it does not exist. The closest the Cabot interviews came to acknowledging Megan Byron's existence as a person in her own right was the careful, indirect reference to not wanting to speak for someone else's experience, which is itself an act of self-protection framed as consideration for the other person. The speech above requires no information Cabot does not have. It requires no legal risk. It requires no violation of anyone's privacy. It requires only the willingness to expand the frame, to say in public what this book has been asking throughout. There is another person in this story. She is real. Her experience matters, and I am sorry for the part I played in disrupting it. That willingness was not demonstrated. In 2 interviews, on the 2 most prominent media platforms available to a private individual in the current media landscape, it was not demonstrated. When language protects instead of reveals, there may be reasons for the absence that are understandable, and intellectual honesty requires naming them. Legal considerations are real. In the landscape of high-stakes public accountability, attorneys routinely advise clients against statements that could be read as admissions of liability. A direct apology to Megan Kerrigan Byron, particularly one that acknowledged harm caused, could potentially expose Cabot to civil claims or other legal consequences. This is not a hypothetical. It is a standard feature of how people navigate public accountability in the context of potential litigation. Personal boundaries are real. Cabot said she did not want to speak for another person's experience, to do to someone else what had been done to her, have the world narrate her story without her consent. There is something genuine in this restraint. The deliberate choice not to use Megan Byron as a prop in her own redemption narrative, not to make the apology into content, into a moment of public pathos directed at a woman who has chosen silence, is not entirely without integrity. Strategic considerations are real. The speaking circuit Cabot has built, the platform she is developing, the narrative she is working on changing, all of it functions better if she is the protagonist of the harm rather than also an agent of it. A direct apology to Megan Byron would complicate the narrative in ways that the managed accountability structure is specifically designed to avoid. Each of these explanations is plausible. Each may contain truth, and none of them, individually or combined, changes what this book has been arguing, because the effect is the same regardless of the cause. Whether the absence of a direct apology is the result of legal advice or genuine consideration for Megan Byron's desire for privacy, or strategic narrative management, or simple emotional incapacity to expand the frame, the effect is that the person most directly harmed by the original situation has not been acknowledged directly by the person who played a role in causing that harm. And that absence, whatever its cause, is real and it matters. When language becomes too careful, it begins to protect rather than reveal. When every word has been stress-tested for its legal and narrative implications before it is spoken, the spontaneous, unguarded quality that genuine remorse requires cannot be present. Not because it is deliberately excluded, but because the architecture that was built to protect against the other risks leaves no room for it. The careful language and the bare remorse cannot coexist. One forecloses the other. The audience member who apologized. There is a moment in the Oprah interview that is, in its small way, more revealing than anything Cabot said. Oprah invited audience members to address Cabot directly. One woman stood up and said, with visible discomfort, that she had judged Cabot harshly based on what she had read and seen, before knowing the crucial parts of the story that were missing from the TikToks. She apologized. "My apologies for the judgment that I passed," she said, and then, "but irrespective of that, I would have never, ever said something mean or wished death upon." She could not finish the sentence. "That's just unacceptable," she said. Cabot received this apology with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. The audience member apologized for her judgment, for having formed a harsh opinion of someone based on incomplete information. She apologized to Cabot directly, in public, on record, in front of a global audience. She named what she had done. She said it was wrong. She used the word apologies. She directed it at the person she had wronged. In the same interview, Cabot, who had an hour on the most prominent podcast platform in the world, in front of a live audience, with Oprah Winfrey as her interlocutor, did not direct an equivalent acknowledgement at the person she had, by her own account, played a role in harming. The audience member who had done less apologized more directly than the person who had done more. This is not a condemnation, it is an observation. The audience member's apology cost her something: the public admission of having been in the wrong, the willingness to say it out loud in a room full of people. Cabot's equivalent apology, had it been offered, would have cost her more. It would have required naming Megan Byron. It would have required saying the thing that the managed accountability structure was specifically designed not to require. It would have been harder than what the audience member did, and the fact that it was harder is precisely why its absence matters more. The question of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not this book's subject, and it is not this book's to ask for or to offer. The people who are in a position to consider forgiving the choices made in the months before July 16, 2025 are the people who were most affected by those choices. Megan Kerrigan Byron, who has not spoken publicly and whose private process is entirely her own. The two sons, whose experience is their own. The people at Astronomer whose working environment was shaped by what happened. Andrew Cabot, Kristen's estranged husband, who by all accounts has remained one of her supporters through the aftermath. But the conditions that make forgiveness possible, that create the space in which it can be considered, in which the person harmed can begin to assess whether and how and in what form they might extend grace, are not present without the foundation that genuine remorse provides. Forgiveness does not require perfection. It does not require that the person who caused harm be fully transformed or fully understood or fully accountable for every dimension of the situation. But it does require the basic acknowledgement. I know I hurt you. I know what I caused. I am sorry for that. Without that acknowledgement, there is no foundation for the people harmed to build on. There is only the situation, unchanged, unacknowledged, present in the quiet, private way that situations are present when they have not been addressed. The people most affected are left with the harm and without the one thing that would have allowed them to decide what to do with it. This is why the absence of the apology is not a small thing. It is not a matter of etiquette or public relations management. It is the absence of the foundation that the people most harmed deserved to have laid before everything else was built on top of it. The interviews, the speaking circuit, the narrative about changing narratives, all of it was built without that foundation. And the structure built without a foundation does not stand forever. It stands until the weight of what was left unaddressed makes itself felt. What the line reveals. The introduction to this book said, "I did not watch the interview looking for someone to hate. I watched waiting for something human, like an apology perhaps, some type of reckoning, a moment where the center of the story would shift away from the woman on the stage and toward the people at home. It never came. This chapter has examined why, not with the purpose of condemning Cabot for the omission, but with the purpose of being honest about what the omission means and what it reveals. It reveals that the accountability offered, for all its real emotional content, was managed rather than bare. That the remorse, for all its genuineness, was self-directed rather than other-directed. That the narrative, for all its emotional intelligence and careful construction, was built to serve the narrator rather than to serve the truth. The line between what was said and what was not said is not a small line. It is the line between an accounting that is complete and one that is not, between a story that has been fully told and a story that is still, in its most essential element, waiting. On one side of that line, everything that was offered, the context, the emotion, the enumeration of personal consequences, the framing of accountability through the lens of personal cost, the careful, legally prudent, strategically sound construction of a narrative that allows a person to move forward. On the other side, 3 words, "I am sorry," said to Megan Kerrigan Byron, directed at the woman who found out on a jumbotron. Acknowledging the harm without explaining it, without contextualizing it, without surrounding it with the protective architecture of managed accountability. 3 words. In an hour-long interview, on the most prominent platform available, they were not there. And what is not there, in this story, always turns out to be more revealing than what is.